Alright, we're going to take a look at some basic font manipulations or text manipulations, things that we can do with text within a design that will alter the appearance of the text or transform it in some creative and interesting way. There's lots of different ways that you can alter the appearance of text in the design window. We don't have time to go through all of them, but let's take a look in Photoshop just to sort of cover some of the basics. So navigate over here to Photoshop, and here we're going to start by looking at tracking. Tracking refers to the amount of white space between letters in a line of text across a selected region of text. So down here in the main body of this graphic, I have paragraph copy or body copy. I'm going to grab my type tool and select, about half of this paragraph, like so. And I'm going to go over to my character panel here in Photoshop, and I'm going to choose the tracking control over here. And as I open up tracking, you can see that by default it's set to 0. 0 is the normal default amount of white space between letters that Photoshop assigns to the text when you place it within the design window, and it's based on the font size of the text. If I want to increase the amount of white space between letters, I choose a positive number. If I want to decrease and collapse the amount of white space between the text, I choose a negative number. So in this particular case, I'll change the value from 0 to 200. And if I deselect the text, you can see here the net effect of increasing tracking in this paragraph copy. You have to be very careful with tracking because by adding white space between the letters, you can decrease the readability of the text for the person trying to consume it off of a screen or digital display. However, if the text is merely a background element or you're expanding it for the purposes of design, you may not need to worry about readability. But in this case, we expanded it to 200, and you can see what effect that has on it. Sometimes we don't want to expand the white space between an entire region of text, but we merely want to change the amount of white space between two adjacent letters. And to do that, we want to use kerning. For example, I made the letter T in this text graphic at the top of the page significantly larger than the rest of the letters in the word text. I'm going to select my type tool. I'm going to go to my layer that contains this word text at the top of the screen, and I'm going to place my cursor between the T and the E. And using the kerning property in my character panel, I'm going to decrease the amount of white space between these two letters to a negative number. Let's go with -50 and see what that does. That's a little bit of an effect. Let's increase that to -100. And you can see that now the amount of white space between the T and the E is much more in line with the white space between the additional letters. Matter of fact, I think I can go even a little bit more just to tighten that space up. So let's go with -125. There we go. And by using kerning, I was able to affect that change and to bring the amount of white space between those first two letters and make it more consistent with the rest of the text. And in doing so, the top portion of the letter T now actually overhangs the second letter in the line. So kerning is a very helpful way to change the amount of white space between two adjacent characters in a line of text. All right, let's move on to leading. Leading is vertical white space between adjacent lines of text. If I select the first half of this paragraph in the main part of this design window, and I go to my leading control, I can change the leading by increasing the number of pixels of white space that are between adjacent lines of text. So let's go with something really extreme. I'm going to change it from its current position, which is auto, which is based on the default setting within Photoshop, to 60 pixels of white space, and deselect so that you can visually see the difference. Down here near the bottom of the screen, I have normal leading between adjacent lines of text, and up on the top part of the paragraph, I've increased the leading to add white space, vertical white space between adjacent lines. Alright, so let's go to horizontal scaling. Horizontal scaling and vertical scaling are very similar. We'll start with horizontal scaling, and horizontal scaling gives the effect of stretching selected text outward, expanding it outward in a horizontal direction. So I can go to the horizontal text property window. Normally the value of horizontal scaling and vertical scaling is set to 100%. That's the normal default percentage. If I double that to 200%, it's as though I grabbed the left and right edge of the text and pulled it apart like an accordion. It just simply created that sort of funky Hall of Mirrors effect of stretching the text out. If I want to compensate for the fact that I've stretched the text apart, sort of pulled it apart, I could then go back to my tracking control. I can reduce the amount of tracking to compensate for the additional amount of horizontal scaling that was applied to the text. And maybe you don't want that much. I might just go with maybe 50. And so by combining horizontal scaling with tracking, I was able to create a more complex application of a visual effect. I have another line of text above that. I'm going to select that line, which is this one right here. And currently this is just normal Myriad Pro set to the regular font style. If I go under the font style menu, you can see that Myriad Pro gives me a lot of different options. I can choose condensed, condensed italics, bold condensed, and bold condensed italics. Condensed text is the opposite of expanded text. So if I choose the condensed font style, I apply the true condensed font style that was created by the designer of the type. And it's a truer effect. It's one that's going to be more consistent within the overall design of this particular font family. So sometimes the effect you want to apply is as easy as going to the font family style menu and seeing if the designer of that font included a style that might help you to achieve whatever visual effect you want to accomplish. If that is within the list of styles available to you, it's going to always be a much better effect than simply dragging the text and doing sort of an accordion style transformation by manually scaling the text up or down or across left to right. All right, so let's go to vertical scaling, and this is pretty much the same thing, but I'm going to go to my vertical scale property window that's set at 100%, and we'll change that to 300% just to really make this text tall. And you can see very quickly I was able to take this text and vertically scale it, and again just giving the effect of stretching the text to make it look really tall. Let's look at vertical type real quick, and I've given you an example of what vertical type looks like over here on the right hand side. To achieve this effect, I selected my type tool, and instead of just selecting it, I clicked and I held onto the tool to reveal the fact that underneath the type tool it allows me to insert text horizontally to make reading of the text easier for the consumer. I can also choose the vertical type tool, and when I come out into the design window, you'll notice that my familiar I-beam cursor is now laid onto its side, and if I begin typing, the letters, they are inserted into the document window vertically from top to bottom. And that just gives you a totally different look and some flexibility within your design space, and you can think of many ways perhaps where you could use this to create some very interesting designs. If I go back to another element of text, I'll go back to my original type layer that's horizontal, and I'll bring this down here. I can also rotate text by simply transforming it and tilting it up on end. And if I put these side by side, you'll see a difference. Two just different ways of altering the text, and at different times you'll choose one over the other depending on what type of alteration or transformation you're wanting to accomplish. The last area of transformation we're going to look at is warp text, and this is one that's probably pretty much familiar to you. Microsoft products such as Microsoft Word and PowerPoint enable you to warp text within the document window. And if I go to the top of the menu bar, you'll see this familiar looking icon. If I click on that, it opens up the warp text property window, and I can choose the type of warping that I want to apply. And in this case, I'm just going to choose arc. And I can customize the amount of bend that I want to put into the arc. I can also choose the amount of distortion. In this particular case, I'll add some horizontal distortion, which will create sort of a fanning effect where the text height is shorter on the left and then it fans out as the arc completes from left to right. And we'll leave that at that. And this completes a look at basic text transformations that you can accomplish within a design program like Photoshop.